I still remember the day I returned to the old brick house, the one my parents had lovingly handed down through generations. Nestled on the edge of an expansive wood, its very bricks whispered of secrets and bygone eras. At first, the isolation felt like a blessing, a quiet haven far removed from the ceaseless rush of modern life. But soon the silence would become a stage for events that defied explanation. It began one bitter winter morning. I had just climbed into my pickup, half asleep, heading out for my customary coffee ritual. That's when I saw them, a trail of bare footprints pressed sharply into the fresh snow beside my car. I stood transfixed, heart pounding, as I followed their path with my eyes. They emerged from the dense woods, skirted the perimeter of my yard, and terminated abruptly at the driver's door. The footprints were unmistakably human, yet there were no signs of any hurried intrusion into the house. I questioned myself repeatedly. Had my fiancé slipped out in the night? But the trail spoke its own unsettling truth. In the following winter, a similar phenomenon unfolded. I awoke to find every inch of our yard etched with these mysterious, unshod prints. This time, my fiancé's terror was palpable. The rational part of me attempted to dismiss it as a misinterpretation, perhaps an animal with a curious gait. Yet the prints were too deliberate, too unmistakably shaped like human feet. Acting on a mix of responsibility and dread, I armed myself with the rifle that had once provided comfort in childhood games of cops and robbers, and ventured into the woods to track down the intruder. What I found was a perplexing divergence in the trail, one path splitting into two, as if to confound my every step. I wondered then if I was pursuing one unknown soul, or perhaps more than one, each deliberately marking their territory with a silent, uncanny signature. Days bled into nights, and my apprehension mounted. The police were called, but with no tangible evidence beyond inexplicable footprints, they were helpless to act. That winter passed with the heavy burden of unanswered questions and unspoken dread. Yet the episode that would define my terror was yet to come. A few months later, just after New Year's, our home was invaded once more. Footprints encircled the property and led directly to the shed, where cherished tools had vanished. Unable to shake the mounting terror, I called my trusted friend Theo, a seasoned hunter with an expensive thermal scope. Together, we set out into the moonlit woods. Theo's voice was steady, analytical, while my own thoughts churned with equal parts adrenaline and disbelief. The snow rendered the landscape eerily translucent, as if the very world were a ghostly canvas, following the eye. Trail in silence. Our every step was punctuated by the crunch of snow and the weight of dread. Eventually, the prints split into dual sets, a divergence that suggested a calculated effort to mislead. For long minutes, we stalked the ephemeral shapes until, almost imperceptibly, the prints deepened. Then, as we crept near a cluster of frost-laden trees, Theo's hand shot out and signaled me to stop. I froze. Through his thermal scope, I witnessed a tableau that chilled me to the bone. 4 figures huddled in the snow. 2 were massive, hunched silhouettes, and 2 were small, fragile beings clinging desperately to a tree. Their naked forms melted into the winter gloom. In that instant, the rational part of my mind clashed with an almost primal terror. I had never seen humanity so stripped of its veneer, so raw and unsettling. We retreated silently, the image seared into our minds. At home, my fiancé's tearful questions mingled with my own fractured recollections. The police conducted a cursory search, but in the absence of concrete evidence, the mystery evaporated into bureaucratic indifference. With winter's chill came the dread that the perpetrators might return, as if drawn to our isolated existence. Then came a summer far removed from that relentless winter of whispers. I decided to embark on a solo hike along a renowned trail, a rite of passage among wanderers seeking solace in nature's embrace. For the first 2 nights, the trail was a haven, endless stretches of towering pines, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and a sense of freedom that filled my lungs with crisp, pure air. Yet on the 3rd night, a different kind of terror unfurled. When my fiancée, Clara, and I found a beautiful rental house at an unbelievable price, we thought we'd hit the jackpot. It was a charming Victorian home on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees and far enough from the main road to feel private. The owner, a quiet, pale man in his 60s, seemed eager to rent it out. He barely asked us any questions before handing over the keys. That should have been our first warning. The house had been on the market for years, though we didn't know that at the time. It had that old house charm: high ceilings, wooden floors, and antique fixtures. The air inside was slightly stale, like it hadn't been lived in for a while. But that wasn't surprising for a house this old. The first few days were normal: unpacking, decorating, and settling in. Clara was in love with the place, always, humming while arranging furniture or admiring the old architecture. But something about the house unsettled me. At first, it was just little things. A door that we swore we had closed would be open in the morning. The lights in the hallway flickered randomly, even though the wiring had supposedly been checked. Our phones would randomly lose signal inside, only to work perfectly the moment we stepped outside. By the end of the first week, the noises started. At night, I'd hear faint knocking sounds, sometimes from the attic, sometimes from inside the walls. At first, I blamed the house settling or rodents, but Clara heard it too. One night, she shook me awake at 2 a.m., her eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. A slow, rhythmic knocking. Not frantic, not random, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the wall behind our bed. I turned on the lamp, my skin crawling. The knocking stopped immediately. The next morning, I checked the attic, expecting to find signs of animals. But it was empty. Just old furniture, dust, and a damp, musty smell that made my head ache. Then Clara found the photographs. She was cleaning out an old storage room when she uncovered a box filled with Polaroid pictures. They were all of the same thing: the house. Every room, every corner, captured from different angles. At first, I thought it was just an old record of renovations, but then I looked closer. In every single photo, no matter what part of the house it showed, there was always the same figure. A man, sometimes standing in a doorway, sometimes just barely visible in the shadows, always facing the camera. His face was never clear, either blurred or obscured by shadows, but he was there. Then we reached the last few pictures. They weren't old. They were of our furniture, our couch, our kitchen, our bed. The realization hit us at the same time. These photos weren't from before we moved in. Someone had been in our house. That night, I set up my phone to record the living room while we slept. I placed it on a shelf facing the hallway. At 3:13 a.m., the phone recorded something, a figure emerging from the darkness of the hallway. It stood there for a long time, just standing, watching. Then, it moved. Not toward us, but toward the... Louis had pressed its hand against it and, this is what makes my skin crawl, it disappeared into the wall. We left that morning. We didn't pack. We didn't try to understand. We just left. But it wasn't over. We found a motel for the night, too shaken to think clearly. Clara barely spoke, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of coffee. "I felt something," she finally said. I turned to her, confused. "In the house, every night. It felt like we weren't alone." Her voice broke. Like something was watching me. I couldn't argue. I had felt it too. The next day, we returned with the police. They searched every inch of the house but found no sign of forced entry, no secret passages, nothing. The walls were solid, no crawl spaces, no hidden rooms. But the photographs? They were still there, and there was a new one on top of the pile. A picture of us taken from inside the house, just before we left. The police had no explanation. The landlord never answered our calls, and when we tried to contact him in person, we found the office abandoned. No records of the man existed. It was as if he had never existed. A week later, out of morbid curiosity, I checked online for any history of the house. That's when I found the old news article. Family disappears without a trace in historic home. It was from 1985, AY. Couple had moved into the house and vanished within a month. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. Their belongings were left behind. Just like us. The house had stood empty for years after that. Tenants came and went, each staying no more than a few weeks. No one ever gave a reason. We never went back. But sometimes late at night, I wonder, if we had stayed just one more night, would we have disappeared too?